very interesting questions after our panel. The first question is about screening, which is always an important question. So I'm going to ask Dr. Veena to respond. So the question is if there is any tool available for midwives for screening women with perinatal mental health problems. So if you can just talk a little bit about that, Dr. Veena.
I think that's a very important question. Thank you for that. Screening for mental health problems is very important, and we do have several structured questionnaires that are available, particularly for common mental disorders like anxiety and depression. For depression specifically, we have the Woolies questions. They are just 2 questions which are very simple and can be easily asked of women to tap into some of the essential core depressive features like feeling down, depressed, lack of interest in activities, and so on. We also have the EPDS, which is more popular, Edinburgh's postnatal depression screening. So this is also easily used for assessing depression. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And also, of course, you know, a lot of women prefer a conversational style, not necessarily questionnaires. So it's sometimes just easy to ask, you know, how have you been feeling in the last couple of weeks? Have you been feeling down and depressed? And then it becomes quite easy to talk about it. The other issues about screening is that while many bodies recommend screening, it's also important to remember that you need to have care pathways to refer women to. And to provide interventions, because just doing screening is not enough. So I think these are some of the nuances. I'm going to ask Dr. Rangarao a very interesting question. It's about intervention and what are the methods and effectiveness of peer-to-peer support groups like moms groups, you know, and like the Postpartum Support International, for example, and other such groups, and how effective are these?
Okay, so there are a lot of peer-to-peer support groups that exist. So there is the kind of informal peer-to-peer support groups, like in UK, there are the local councils where you can actually meet up for a coffee or breakfast and sort of talk about it. And there are slightly more formal support groups that are offered by charities like the National Childbirth Trust, the Action on Postpartum Alliance. And these provide a much more formal networking opportunities to share your experiences, talk about your sort of how difficult it has been, and so on and so forth. And more importantly, it offers something where there's a structure to the day that you can go out and do something and meet somebody else who's got the same problem. And in keeping with any principles of any group therapy, you learn a lot more by sharing and listening to how others have dealt with these sort of issues, and so on and so forth. In the hospital setting in UK, there's a role called peer support workers. So these peer support workers are people who have actually had mental health problems, who have recovered, who come back to actually support sort of people who are recovering. So their role actually is much more sort of useful. So it's that tiered layer in terms of sort of informal, sort of bit more formal charity and bit more structured. And there are different sort of layers in which you can access peer support. And obviously these, from a purely service user perspective, in UK use the word service user rather than patient. These are seen as most beneficial and supportive in the journey of recovery.
Thank you, Dr. Rangarao. I think that was very useful, and you know, the extremely important role of peer-to-peer support and mom-to-mom groups, you know, sort of more informal methods of support. In fact, for low and middle income countries, the WHO has recommended the Thinking Healthy program, which is also a peer-led program where you have grandmothers as well as, you know, mothers and relatives and sisters also offering support. And it's been found to be actually quite useful. And there's a high level of evidence, particularly in milder forms of depression and anxiety, that has been found to be very useful. So I think it's a very important question. The next question I would like to direct to Dr. Lakshmi, and this has come up in quite a few questions from the audience, and that's about the role of the nurse in perinatal mental health. And why, you know, is it important to have perinatal mental health as part of routine nursing, and how can you improve the syllabus of nursing to include perinatal mental health? So would you please respond to that, Lakshmi?
Thank you. This is a really important question, and I think this conference itself is a proof of how it's a huge team that actually can bring on obstetric care. And when we talk about health, we mean mental and physical well-being. And I think over curriculums, both medical and nursing, there is a need to improve the need to assess mental health in a more cohesive manner. And like what Dr. Prabha already said, do it for everybody so that we don't miss. Use a particular screening tool that we know works for our population, and then identify and then move it on. So what we will do in the part of the question of how to do the assessment is universal, and it is the same whether it is going to be done by the doctor, by the midwife, or whether we are going to give it to the patient and ask her to do it. But I think it is having a standard operating procedure in our place which works best for our population, because some setups are extremely large and there will be 100 200 people sitting in an outpatient clinic, whereas some may be smaller setups. So I think yes, it is a less addressed topic. There is surely more focus on this, as Dr. Prabha mentioned, with WHO also adding it to the agenda now. And in terms of diagnosis and referral, I think it's only when we screen we can diagnose. Otherwise, we tend to diagnose them in extreme situations where they are already, significantly ill. And at that point, the diagnosis and initial treatment becomes different in different parts of the country and different parts of the world based on the setups in which we are. The ideal setups are perinatal networks where you can get them into a system where there will be counselors who are supported by the relevant team of psychiatrists, and then they can be seen. I think some cities in Chennai, like how Nimans have a good setup, will be able to do that when it comes to India. There are perinatal networks in the UK where this works. Whereas in many other setups, it is very much an individualized system. So I think for the nurses, not only to be equipped to know how to do the screening, but also to be able to do counseling is going to be very, very vital part. So I think these are two areas of their training in which we should continue to focus, because they are the forefront and they actually are with the women for such a long time during labor and during the inpatient stay, that they are able to assess things at a much better level than the one-off sitting of when we see them in an outpatient, or even when we as clinicians have good rapport and can take a good history. There is still more that can meet the nurses and the midwives' eyes. So I think that's a very good question, and I think there is a huge role, and I think each unit should bring on a system, and to a large extent, there are many guidelines universally that we can adapt. So I think it is which we adapt that we have to choose. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Dr. Ranga, you want to mention the role of the perinatal mental health nurse in as it is now defined in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, again, in UK, because things are slightly more evolved in terms of the service, and that has only happened in the recent last 5-10 years. There was a significant role for the actual nurse in the community. So in the community team, we have nurses who are integrated to a specialized perinatal community team where there's, as I mentioned, there's a doctor, there's a nurse, a psychologist, and a social worker. So essentially the nurse's role is very much in supporting the assessment, supporting the interventions in the community, also talking about the medication, side effects, and generally offering any sort of generic nursing advice in liaison with the other professionals in the team. Obviously, when they come to the inpatient unit, nurses would have a very much more defined role, but that's what they do in the community teams.
Thanks for that. Dr. Veena, there are some questions on tocophobia about, how do you identify it and how do you treat it? Would you be able to respond to that, please?
Sure. Tocophobia is a complex condition. Like all of you rightly know, it is fear of becoming pregnant, fear of pregnancy, fear of childbirth. A lot of women are not very forthcoming with this information. Sometimes it takes 1 or 2 sessions with the woman to establish a good enough rapport and elicit this information that they're actually in fact fearful. And intervention typically involves a lot of counseling. Sometimes it also involves education, because a lot of women are unaware And sometimes they have a lot of misconceptions about what could entail pregnancy and how difficult labor and childbirth is likely to be. So it also involves giving them a fair amount of education about the whole process of pregnancy, childbirth, and so on. And also to make them ready for it, because a lot of them, although they're anxious, they're also experiencing a lot of social stigma because of the fact that they're not conceiving. And so, somewhere there is this ambivalence about, yes, I'm fearful, but yes, somewhere I also would like to conceive and have a child. So I think addressing all of this in counseling and also to provide the right amount of education will be very, very critical in addressing it.
And there may be some women who will probably need more sort of advanced behavior therapy and, psychological interventions if it doesn't sort of respond to the basic counseling.
Yes. So cognitive behavior therapies are known to be very effective to address any kind of phobia and also tocophobia. So in very severe cases, cognitive behavior therapies are indicated for these women.
Thanks, Dr. Veena. I think there's some couple of important questions on birth trauma, and I want Lakshmi to handle that as well. That, in the increasing medicalizing of childbirth, birth trauma is not addressed adequately, and the whole concept of obstetric violence. Would you be able to address that and how it can actually influence the whole process of birth as well as postpartum mental health and future pregnancies?
The issue of birth trauma is many a times missed, and especially as doctors, we quite often only tend to recognize those that patients come and tell us literally in that many words that I found the birth experience difficult. I think that happens if we don't use a routine screening system to keep an eye on how they've recovered from a birth, and also if we don't have systems in place to adequately debrief women whenever there has been a deviation from what is normal. But what we must understand is, as clinicians, what we understand as normal and what patients perceive as normal are completely different. So we don't even know at the outset what their expectations are. So I think the first step, as with any condition, is the prevention. So I think the peer group that we mentioned, things like an antenatal class, some needing more individualized sessions, and continuing to provide that support during the intrapartum period and watching how they are responding in labor would be the first critical steps. If beyond that there has again been something that makes them appear unhappy, I think to pick it up while we are giving the postnatal care is important. Are we observing more? Is possible? The answer to that is yes, but also some of it is because now there is a heightened awareness among all cadres of staff involved with maternity care that this is a very, very important area that not only changes the woman's life, but also the newborn's outcome and the family fabric. So I think we are noticing more, and surely in countries like India, we still are in a system where medicalization of the healthcare is the only way to avoid some very severe maternal and fetal complications. So I think now that some of our Millennium Development Goals are being achieved, we can now reach that stage where the medicalization can be combined with other methods of ensuring the birth trauma also is given a priority, and all the emotional welfare of the women are being addressed. Obstetric violence surely is a very, very big area of concern for the women, and many people will go to only particular doctors or particular setups because they believe in that setup it is not available. So I think, especially if it happens even where they think they are going to be safe, that the trauma for that can be significantly more. So I do think that medicalization surely has a role, because when it is only a midwifery-led service, there's more time, there is less of interventions. Even things, simple things like an IV line can be very traumatic to some. And we may think an episiotomy is a very routine thing to help for childcare, but for somebody to be sitting at that perineum and suturing can leave the woman with a lot of feeling of insecurity and unhappiness. So I think you can again here too, after delivery, to screen everybody carefully and to identify if there is evidence of birth trauma soon after, so that a good debriefing at that point itself will help the whole process is the way forward. If that's not done in the subsequent pregnancy, it's extremely important that for each pregnancy, a very detailed history, including the intrapartum time, is taken. And this is what every doctor, every nurse can do. And also ask what your experience was. How did you manage? And I think those two questions itself quite often will lead us to this issue. And we can then address it based on what the individual circumstance. But as already mentioned by the other panelists, I think knowledge is going to be the first key, where we empower them to say these all things were normal. Yes, these things did not go well, but it did not leave you with a problem. And then they feel much better and they come out of it. And to refer where you know that just the counseling by you or the time you're given is not sufficient, and always to keep a contact number so that they can get back to you at any stage. They may go home and 3 months later think and still think, oh, things are not right, and they should not leave unaddressed matters. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi. I think, you really responded to how various aspects of obstetric trauma, how it can be prevented, how health professionals need to be careful, how midwives can screen for past birth trauma, and the importance of debriefing, as well as if some woman develops more post-traumatic stress disorder kind of symptoms, to consider referral. In the sort of realm of violence, there are a few questions, and I'm going to address that to Dr. Veena. And this is about, intimate partner violence during pregnancy and the postpartum period. First of all, how common is it? And some people have asked whether, you would advise divorce if there's a lot of violence happening. So could you just address the whole sort of area of intimate partner violence a little bit?
Sure. I think this is a very important question. It's also a very sensitive concern. A lot of women do experience intimate partner violence much before pregnancy. And sometimes during the period of pregnancy, some of these concerns may escalate. So it's always important to be sensitive to it. And also, since we would have already collected some information about their relationship with various family members, particularly with their spouse, and we know how important spousal support is for the welfare of the lady during pregnancy as well as post childbirth. Since we already have access to this information, it already raises some red flags that some women can be at risk for violence, either familial violence or intimate partner violence. So we are particularly careful to assess and also monitor these women a little closely to see, what could be going on in their personal lives. Sometimes women are more open to talking about it, in which case it's easy. We already have the information we need, and we use that effectively to intervene and to also sometimes involve the spouse and family in the treatment and tell them very gently how to care for the lady and how to take care of her during this period, even if we don't very directly broach the topic of intimate partner violence without the consent of the lady. Of course, in some cases, it is very severe, and so we have to protect the lady and the welfare of the fetus or the child, whatever the case may be. And in these cases, we take action, and these days we also have several laws which mandate us to protect the welfare of the woman as well as the child. So we sometimes, admit the lady in the hospital to ensure her safety. While some of these interventions can be done, we also involve social workers who are quite well versed with taking care of child welfare issues, women's welfare issues, and we liaise with the legal team as well as the social welfare team and try to ensure that they are protected. Divorce always is not the immediate solution. It's not something even the women or the families are thinking about. It would be important to ensure that violence does not take place during this time as far as possible, and also to offer some psychological counseling services by which the family can decide whatever option is best for them. It would be hard for the clinicians to take these decisions, and so engaging in the process of counseling would be a priority. And through the process of counseling, of course, the right decision can be arrived at the family, which also makes them comfortable with the kind of decisions that they take. So I hope this answers the question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Veena. I think you've really sort of covered the whole spectrum of, how to assess violence, how common it is, what impact it can have, both in pregnancy and in the postpartum period, it being one of the strongest risk factors for, depression, anxiety, as well as the issue of suicidality that Dr. Rangarao spoke about, and the importance of involving social welfare, child protection services, NGOs, shelters. I mean, I think it's not just the responsibility of the obstetric team, but, to have a range of services available to us. I think the sort of last part is going to be spent a little bit on the role of fathers. There are quite a few questions on paternal mental health, fathers' mental health, and the role of the father in protecting women's postpartum depression against postpartum depression. And also, during COVID times, men's mental health has taken quite a beating because they've gone through a lot of financial issues, etc. And what is the role of sort of men's mental health and fathers' mental health? So I'm going to, ask Dr. Rangarao to respond to one, the whole area of paternal mental health, as well as the role of the partner or the spouse in preventing postpartum depression or, helping out at that point.
I mean, this is obviously, there's quite a lot to say with regard to the paternal mental health and how. So in the first instance, obviously partners can be so very supportive during the pregnancy and postnatal period. More importantly, there is increasing evidence to suggest that partners have a big sort of role with regard to the outcomes as well. So what we tend to do in UK mainly is we involve fathers at a very early stage. So the consultation is done with both the sort of parents present as soon as the baby is born. Most consultations are a joint consultation with the father as well. But then moving forwards, sometimes when there are particular issues, we would have 1 or 2 sessions with the father to say how they're coping. And we also sort of try and explore in certain particular conditions the exact bonding issues with the father, not just with the mother, and explore that, because that's a terribly important sort of part. And if you wanted to look at preventing domestic violence or whatever, involving the fathers very earlier on, not just in terms of the pregnancy and postnatal care, but getting a better understanding of the postnatal issues, depression, and what they can do to support. It's not just the practical support with the baby, but also the emotional support, what they can offer. Yeah.
So I'm just going to put it to Dr. Lakshmi. Instead of many cultures where, there's patriarchy, and so Dr. Rangarao talked about what is the ideal scenario and what's done in countries like the UK. I'm going to ask you about what about countries which are sort of low middle income, where invariably the partner is not sort of actively involved. How are you changing the scenario? What are you doing to shift gears and become, get the fathers more involved? Dr. Lakshmi? Dr. Lakshmi is not getting it, not sort of. I think Veena, would you like to sort of respond to that? How can we get fathers more involved? And also in COVID situation, what do we think is the sort of whole role of the father in helping the moms?
Yeah. Like I said, spousal support is very important during pregnancy and also after childbirth. It is something that definitely makes the lady feel a lot more comfortable. In our culture, although a lot of women are accompanied by their mothers or mother-in-laws or some female family member, we make it a point to tell her to, come for a follow-up with her husband. And the lady really appreciates it, and it gives us an opportunity to also educate the husband about the role he can play in the welfare of the lady during pregnancy and also after childbirth. That is actually quite valued by the lady, and also the husband is able to then realize how much his support makes a difference to the woman and how it can safeguard her mental health. And also, we discussed quite a bit about shared time and quality time that we can spend during pregnancy, which actually has a great impact on her mental health.
Thanks, Veena. I think, both Dr. Rangarao and Veena have sort of emphasized the role of involving the father at a very early stage, paying attention to the father's mental health. Fathers groups are being formed. Many times fathers are coping with substance use issues, and I think we need to address that. So I would like to thank the panel for, wonderful discussion, and the audience for great questions and answers. I think perinatal mental health is an important issue that needs to be addressed in obstetric care, and it's something we feel that is a growing field. We hope that everybody who tuned in had a good sort of image and idea about the length and breadth of perinatal mental health, and we hope that more people will get interested in this field from now on. Thank you very much. And I thank all the panelists and the organizers. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.